So officials are facing tough questions about why law enforcement appear to be so unprepared ahead of the violence on Capitol Hill. Many observers quickly pointing out the stark contrast between the images we saw at the height of the Black Lives Matter protest last summer, when demonstrators of all races faced a massive show of force, were sometimes pepper sprayed and hit with rubber bullets. Contrast that to the much smaller police presence when this mob, mostly white Trump supporters, what they faced when they barreled through the halls of Congress on Wednesday. And among the most unnerving of images, the photo of a man parading through with a flag that has been described as a white supremacist flag. Listen to what Congressman James Clyburn talked about when with Jake Tapper this morning.
But the fact of the matter is, that flag has been adopted by skinheads and white supremacists in Germany. You can't, it's illegal for the swastika to fly in Germany. So they took that flag. So when that guy walked in there with that flag, he wasn't talking about the Confederacy. He was talking about his whiteness. That flag is the flag of white nationalism and the flag of white supremacy.
Joining me now to discuss is Rashawn Ray, a sociology professor at the University of Maryland and a fellow at the Brookings Institution. Rashawn, good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
But sadly, we're starting off this way. So when you looked at these images, and here you are, at the University of Maryland, I mean, this is a stone's throw away from the U.S. Capitol, and when you saw what we all witnessed, in your view, what were this throng of people saying to America? What's the message that you believe they were sending by these acts?
Well, Fredricka, it's always great to be on with you, and definitely Happy New Year. I mean, to what has become a very, very interesting start of 2021. I mean, as you mentioned, I'm just a stone's throw away, either at Maryland or at Brookings. And the message that they were sending is that it is not okay for people to be able to fairly participate in our democracy. What they were upset about is throwing a temper tantrum about the fact that more people voted over the last century when it comes to presidential elections, over the fact that 2 Democratic senators won in Georgia. And that's a very, very key point for people to recognize. This divide that we're seeing right now in America it's about race, but it's not necessarily just a divide between white people and black people. It's really a divide between Democrats and Republicans. And a recent Pew study showed this, that over 75% of Democrats said that, yes, the United States of America is more difficult for black people compared to white people. Less than 10% of Republicans said that.
So you saw this as less about race and more about politics. I mean, there was a noose outside of the Capitol that had been erected. I mean, it took some real planning to put it there. There were news crews, their equipment that was trashed, and then someone used some of the cable to erect a noose. But in your view, this still was more about politics. That was, I guess, the intent of most of these rioters?
Well, no, let me be clear. This is definitely about race on behalf of what I call domestic terrorists who stormed the Capitol. I want people to keep in mind this. This is the key question. Imagine if the people who stormed the Capitol last week were not white. That speaks to the role that race plays in America. You mentioned the noose. We could also talk about black Capitol police officers who reported being called the N-word. We can highlight the Nazi paraphernalia. It was very clear that they were doubling down on racism. And that's one of the interesting things about policing and racism in America. The reason why they were not viewed as a threat is because oftentimes whiteness is not viewed as a threat to law enforcement, while blackness is. So what we saw last summer were about nearly 6,000 police officers, law enforcement, coming to D.C. in June for a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest. There were about 300 people arrested last summer, pretty much on that one weekend, less than 60 on the Capitol that day, where they stormed the Capitol, as Congressman Clyburn said, finding offices that people don't even know where they're located at. It was very much about race and racism, and the Republican Party needs to figure it out.
And we're also learning a bit more about some of the people who are rounded up after the fact. you know, in the case of Cleveland Gordon Meredith of Alabama, who was staying at a Holiday Inn in Southwest D.C., right in the shadows of Capitol Hill there, agents found 3 guns, a Glock 19, a 9mm pistol, and an assault rifle, and approximately hundreds of rounds of ammunition. So much, you know, that is very upsetting there. And this person allegedly texted ahead of time about his plot to take out the House Speaker and then having weapons on his trip to D.C. He's facing federal charges, including writing the threats and possession of an unregistered firearm and ammo. I mean, this is a very lengthy list, but, you know, he's being detained at least until a court hearing next week. But, you know, is that enough? We're talking about intent here and that kind of arsenal. And
I mean, it's
the
not
House
enough.
Speaker.
I mean, look, these are domestic terrorists, and we really have to look at how they were able to gain so much access. I mean, we've seen police officers taking selfies with them, letting them in. We heard that some of these domestic terrorists were flashing military badges, flashing police IDs. These are individuals who are our next door neighbors. They're lawyers, they're CEOs, they are elected officials. And part of the way that they were able to get through with this is either benign neglect on the short end or some form of conspiracy on the broader end, and it needs to be fully investigated at the congressional level.
And we're still trying to corroborate a lot of the reporting there. And, you know, you've heard it a lot, Rashawn. I have too, where people look at this aghast and say, wow, this is America. And the bottom line is, yes, this is America. You can remove the question mark.
It definitely is America. I mean, unfortunately, it is America in all of its glory and in all of its badness. While that Capitol coup was happening, what was happening in Georgia was that we had the Senate flip. And it wasn't simply about the Senate flipping from Republican to Democrat, but the fact of how many people were able to come out to vote. The fact that John Lewis's legacy was his Reverend Raphael Warnock, and then a person who used to work on his staff in John Ossoff. That's the legacy. The legacy that black people represented over 50% of the Democrats who voted in the state of Georgia, as well as in other states. And the people who stormed the Capitol did not want that to happen. This is America. Biden's going to have a tough task moving forward, but Republicans also need to play their part and do something about this as well.
Rashawn Ray, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.